Hey everyone, so in this segment we're going to be talking about career options for religious studies graduates. Now, many of you might be studying religious studies, or maybe you're thinking about studying religious studies, and you're wondering what career options are available for students who actually want to stay within that particular field. Now, of course, many people who have studied religious studies will go on to other fields and they'll take a lot of the skills that they learned and transferred it to other areas as well, which is completely reasonable. However, there's a lot of students who want to go into this particular field of study and want to stay within this realm, which is also very reasonable as well. So we're going to cover a couple of the most popular areas. Of course, we can't touch upon all of them. There's just far too many of them, but hopefully this acts as a starting point to many people who are doing some research and wondering what options are going to be available to them. So starting off with the first one, probably the most obvious one is going into ministry. And so this can involve being a pastor or maybe working within a religious institution in a variety of different settings, whether it's fundraising or being a coordinator or a youth gatherer or some of the other positions that they have within ministry as well. Of course, if you want to become a pastor, in a lot of cases, you're going to have specialized study, whether it's through the particular church that you're studying with, or it's going to be at the Master of Divinity level, or maybe there's some other degree requirements that are going to be needed as well before somebody can go down that path. In some of the other areas, like being a coordinator, or fundraising, or some of the other opportunities involved within ministry, in a lot of cases, they don't necessarily require a religious studies degree per se. In some cases, actually, they don't necessarily require a degree at all. And so it really does depend on where you're actually looking to work and where you're located, what your background is, that type of thing as well. And so that's something else for you to consider. Another thing is a lot of people look at teaching. There's a lot of faith-based educational institutions at the elementary and secondary level as well. And so students will actually pay a premium to be able to have religious-based curriculums, and their parents are more than happy to kind of send them to these institutions because they value that quite tremendously and see it as kind of a cornerstone to their education as well. Now, of course, you might not necessarily be able to teach just religious studies, but having that foundation in addition to maybe another teachable subject or just having general education requirements might make you a compelling applicant in that realm as well. You also need to keep in mind that you might need some additional qualifications as well in terms of being licensed as a teacher where you happen to live as well. And so be prepared for some additional education in that regard as well. Another great opportunity is not-for-profits. Not-for-profits as well might be an area where you don't necessarily need a religious studies degree per se, but there are probably going to be some exceptions to this as well. It might be a very religious-based not-for-profit, and having that foundation might make somebody a little bit more compelling or give them the context that they're going to need in order to serve the not-for-profit in the way that they're hoping to be served as well. There's a lot of startup not-for-profits as well, and a lot of ones that are looking for funding and opportunities for people who can actually act as a volunteer as well. And so this is a great opportunity for people who might actually want to go into a completely different field with the skills that they learned in their degree, but actually still want to keep a kind of a side part-time job type of thing or a volunteer type of arrangement with maybe some of these not-for-profits, or even kind of a freelance type of arrangement with them as well. And so don't necessarily look exclusively for full-time options if this is something that you're not necessarily comfortable with looking at on a full-time basis. There are tons of opportunities for you to look at there as well. Another thing is really international development, which goes hand in hand with not-for-profits as well. A lot of organizations around the world, United Nations is probably one of the more popular ones and famous ones, but there's a lot of other ones that are kind of similar to them or that do a lot of the same work or very comparable work to them as well, that might be looking for some interns or have some positions that will actually require you to go overseas as well for a period of time and to actually work within communities, perhaps within religious communities as well. And some of them are actually led by particular churches and particular faiths as well. And so looking for opportunities there will probably be your best lead. In fact, in a lot of cases, having the religious studies background probably won't necessarily be as important as having a particular affiliation with the particular religion that is going to be leading these initiatives. So that's one other thing to actually consider as well. Another thing that a lot of people don't actually consider is perhaps going into the military, not necessarily to just take up any job that you can get within the military, but there's particular positions within the military that actually look for people who might have a particular background kind of related to religious studies. And what that is somebody who might be able to go to the military as a chaplain. Now, going in as a chaplain is probably going to require you to have some advanced training, and so you might actually have to be a practicing pastor or have some experience being a pastor. You might need to have your Master of Divinity studies as well, or perhaps you can work out some type of arrangement where they'll sponsor you to, there's a lot of different ways of actually approaching it as well. But this is a particular area that a lot of people overlook, and they don't necessarily consider the fact that the military would need somebody like a chaplain. Also, hospitals will a lot of times look for people who are chaplains as well too, and maybe work on a part-time or full-time basis, depending on their particular needs as well. But again, in a lot of cases, it will involve some additional study there as well. Another great example might be a correctional chaplain as well. So working with a lot of the government institutions, the jails and that type of thing as well, to work on more of a rehabilitation type of arrangement. This might not necessarily require a religious studies background, but this might be among one of the majors that candidates will have before they go into this particular field as well. The last thing is really just further education. Further education, and I know that this is probably not the most popular route, but when I talk about further education, I don't necessarily just mean kind of a master's and then PhD. I mean kind of more specialized training as well. Another thing to really think about, and this is probably going to require very specialized training at the master's level, is perhaps being a counselor, a marriage counselor, a family counselor. And the reason for this is a lot of people who are seeking counsel, particularly if it's based on marriage and if they happen to have some basis of faith or religion within their household, will look to somebody who has kind of the same faith or value as they might have. And so maybe this is facilitated by the church directly, or you open your own private practice, and the cornerstones of your practice are going to be around the ethics and around the teachings of that particular faith, which people might actually be willing to pay a premium for because it's something that they hold very true to them. Another thing might be law school and working on uh, international development type projects or ethics type projects, bioethic type projects after the fact, if you work in maybe a pharmaceutical company or with governments. So there's very specialized types of positions. They're kind of few and far in between, and so it's not something that might be as readily accessible as maybe some of the other options we had discussed. But these are kind of the more specialized options that might open up with further specialized training as well. The last thing is kind of a more creative one. It's being an independent consultant. Now, this is going to require someone to essentially become an entrepreneur in a lot of cases, but you really get your creative juices flowing. If you have a degree such as this, where the demand might not necessarily be what it's like for a computer science graduate, as an example, it's really going to require you to use your critical thinking abilities to determine how you can actually transfer the skills that you've learned into the particular area that you want to work in, but also how to commercialize your particular field of study. And so a great example, and this is something that you might be able to investigate further, is maybe there's a lot of brands who are looking to expand to certain areas of the world. And let's just assume that it's a fashion brand as an example, and they're looking to cater to people within a particular country. And maybe that country is very strongly rooted in a particular religion that they might not necessarily know a whole lot about it. So maybe they need a religious studies consultant to help them determine which components of their brand and which components of their fashion line are going to be well received or maybe not very well received by the religious communities that are there, which is going to drive a lot of the commerce and drive a lot of the demand for their particular products. And so it's a very niche type of thing. It's not something that's going to be for everyone. That's just one example of a way to actually commercialize the knowledge that you have in a way that's actually going to benefit the private sector. And again, this is going to require people to become a little bit more innovative and a little bit more creative. It isn't necessarily a route for everyone, but I think a lot of people get boxed into a corner where they feel as though they absolutely can't stay within the field, but there are opportunities for people who are looking to be creative as well. So hopefully that gave you a very solid foundation and just kind of a starting point for your further research as well. If you have anything that you'd like to add to this as well, I'd love to hear your comments, questions, and concerns in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much again for watching. Make sure to subscribe. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.